Coming up on Capitol Journal's Week in Review. Some busy legislative days in the State House as the Legislature gets into the thick of the regular session. We'll hit the highlights. Karen Goldsmith reports on the enactment of a new law aimed to crack down on the trafficking of deadly fentanyl. Randy Scott reports on the criminal justice proposals being floated in the House. Joining us in studio are Carla of Alabama Appleseed, Mark Dixon of the A+ Education Partnership, and Abe Harper of the Innovation Corporation. It's all next on Capitol Journal. From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. It was a busy week in the legislature as the House and Senate met for the 5th, 6th, and 7th legislative days. That means the 30-day session is now 1/5 complete. The biggest news of the week was the enactment of a bill aimed at cracking down on the trafficking of deadly fentanyl. House Bill 1 from Representative Matt Simpson of Daphne sailed through the Senate and was quickly signed into law by Governor Kay Ivey. Karen Goldsmith has more on this issue.
In her State of the State address, Alabama Governor Kay Ivey said,
"And tonight I'm also urging you, our legislators, to pass House Bill 1 so I can sign it into law as soon as possible. By doing this, we will put any traffickers of this deadly drugs behind bars and keep them there."
On Thursday, April 6th, the 7th day of the 2023 regular legislative session, the bill passed the Alabama Senate on a 31-0 vote. State Representative Matt Simpson is the bill's sponsor.
This bill is crafted to only go after pure fentanyl, so you have the dealers, the people that are bringing it into the community, not the users, not the addicts. So if you have between 1 and 2 grams of fentanyl, it will be a mandatory minimum of 3 years. Between 2 and 4 grams will be a mandatory minimum of 10 years. Between 4 and 8 grams will be a mandatory minimum of 25 years. And more than 8 grams will be a mandatory life in prison.
State Senator Roger Smitherman usually opposes mandatory minimums, but in this case,
not only the use of this, but you got folks putting this in other stuff. You got folks that don't even know that this stuff is in stuff and dying. And then when somebody told me something about that it could be in your pocket, and because of the pores of your skin, that it could go through the pores of your skin and you die. That in contrast to my personal position about these mandatory, this is a necessity.
The question that I would have is that what reason would a person have for carrying fentanyl anyway?
To be honest with you, there's an economic reason to do it. You can take a kilo of heroin, buy it for $5,000 or $6,000. By the time you cut it up, you make between $60,000 and $80,000 off that kilo of heroin. But with fentanyl, you can take that same kilo, buy it for $5,000 or $6,000. You can sell it for $1.2 to $1.6 million.
Governor Ivey says the 100% bipartisan passage in the Alabama House and Alabama Senate is an example for the nation. For Capitol Journal, I'm Karen Goldsmith.
Also going to the governor's desk this week was a bill that would strengthen hospital and nursing home visitation rights. Senate Bill 113 from Senator Garland Gudger was given final passage by the House in a 100-1 vote with 4 abstaining. Senator Gudger explained his bill here on Capitol Journal.
The bill in the end allows for visitors to come to the hospital, and the person that is still in charge of those visitors is still the hospital and their policies and procedures. But this bill goes one step further and it does an essential caregiver. So the essential caregiver is designated by the patient, and we have in the bill, if the patient is unconscious or not able to designate an essential caregiver, then we have a list through law, through the power of attorney or a guardian or then your family members. And from that, they have an essential caregiver, can be by their side for 2 hours a day, no matter what, and also with visiting hours. So you have visiting hours plus 2 hours a day. So the visitors now are still controlled by the hospital policy and procedures and the treating physician. And if the treating physician says this person is too sick, for example, they have white low blood cells from cancer or something, we don't need people coming in. That
does happen.
Yeah, and it does. And you don't need people in with maybe having the flu or children that are in there. So there's not going to be any visitors to this room. And we're fine with that. But this bill goes to the next step in saying, but you can designate an essential caregiver that will be by that person's bedside at least 2 hours a day.
The Senate this week took up and quickly passed legislation dealing with elections, in particular, efforts to maintain their security. Senate Bills 9 and 10 from Senator Clyde Chambliss of Prattville would codify already existing policy dealing with paper ballots and electronic voting machines. The bills passed unanimously.
Well, there's two bills. One of them says that we will always have paper ballots. Now, they can be counted by an electronic machine, that's fine, but what we want is to make sure that we have an audit trail. There's things that can happen to an electronic machine, lightning can strike, power can go out, that type thing. No matter what, we have a paper ballot. The other bill prohibits modems from being put into our voting machines so that no one can hack into them. We know that if there's any type of modem technology, someone can hack into it. So the best way to keep our elections secure is just not have any modems in our vote counting machines. Unanimously, both Republicans and Democrats are in favor of safe elections. And in Alabama, we're blessed that we do have safe elections. And this is a look-forward bill just to make sure that we don't have problems in the future.
The Senate also passed legislation aimed at creating more educational and re-entry opportunities for Alabama's female inmates who are awaiting release. Senate Bill 5 is sponsored by Senator Linda Coleman Madison of Birmingham, who said currently female inmates don't have a dedicated facility for this, while their male counterparts do.
This bill is offered by Pardons and Parole. Basically, what it does is establish one female residential center to house the women for training. This is the same model as we have with the Perry County facility, housing up to about 100 participants, looking at a limit of 90 days. It's a reentry program to cut down on recidivism, to provide the resources there for residential, for training, and those types of training for transition as these women get ready to be reentered into society. And that's basically what it does. So if there are no questions, I'd like to move final passage as amended.
After much anticipation, this week we finally saw the details of the sweeping economic development package supported by Governor Ivey and legislative leaders. The bills constituting what they're calling the game plan were introduced and began the legislative process this week. Each of the bills have a House sponsor and a Senate sponsor. The primary legislation is the Enhancing Alabama's Economic Progress Act, House Bill 240 from Representative Danny Garrett, Senate Bill 164 from Senate President Pro Tem Greg Reed. It would renew the Alabama Jobs Act, the state's primary industrial recruiting statute, which is set to expire in July. It would increase the cap the state can leverage toward projects by $25 million each year, topping out at $475 million in 2027. It also increases the growing Alabama site development grants from $20 million to $30 million. Those are the dollars used to help local communities improve sites to attract industry. The Site Evaluation and Economic Development Strategy Act, or SEEDS, House Bill 257, also from Garrett, and Senate Bill 165 from Senator Arthur Orr. It would allow the State Industrial Development Authority to accelerate development of industry-ready sites. It would also create the Alabama Site Development Fund to allow up to $2 million to pay for site assessments and development grants. That's where local industrial development boards could apply to have a local site either assessed or further developed. The Innovation and Small Business Act, House Bill 247 from Representative Anthony Daniels and Senate Bill 152 from Senator Bobby Singleton. These bills aim to grow the state's innovation economy and support underrepresented businesses and enterprises, especially in rural areas. It would allow up to $25 million in Innovate Alabama grants through the Alabama Innovation Corporation. And finally, the Enhancing Transparency Act, House Bill 240 from Representative Cynthia Allman and Senate Bill 151 from Senator Garland Gudger. It would amend the Jobs Act to require the Department of Commerce to publish all incentivized project information online. That information will include the return on investment from the incentives used. These bills were developed after recommendations from a special commission led by Lieutenant Governor Will Ainsworth. I spoke with him about the final product of his panel's work earlier this week.
Yeah, very pleased with the results. So, we got tasked with the legislature of looking at our incentives and then giving recommendations on what we should do going forward. And so, you look at Alabama Jobs Act, right? It's working. And, other states are certainly looking at what we're doing and trying to, copy that. And so what we wanted to make sure is that we looked at other states, competitors, and, it turned out, our incentive program's working. We're getting 168% return. When you look at that on the Alabama Jobs Act, it's a pay-as-you-go. And, it's certainly working in our state. And then, look at Grow in Alabama, right? And we realized that we need more sites in Alabama that are shovel ready for projects. And we're really a victim of our own success where, companies are continuing to locate here. That's not going to stop. And so we need to make sure from a state we're investing in future sites and being forward thinking. And so with that, we're going to. And, so both things really excited about. And, I want to say this, it's great to see bipartisanship support. You see what goes on in D.C., the fact yesterday at the press conference, you've got the minority leader in the Senate, minority leader in the House, Republican governor, lieutenant governor, pro tem, speaker, all on the same page. And the reason why is this is working. I used the analogy, yesterday about, it's basically the same thing as recruiting in football, right? If Alabama and Auburn, couldn't recruit in football, then of course they wouldn't be able to compete against other SEC schools. And so you look at that, we've got to have incentives if we're going to compete with other states.
One issue that continues to gain steam in the legislature is cutting the state sales tax on essential groceries. Multiple pieces of legislation are in development to address the issue in different ways, some sponsored by Republicans, some sponsored by Democrats, and some working in bipartisan fashion. I spoke with Senate President Pro Tem Greg Reed earlier this week about how the grocery tax has suddenly become a top issue this session.
If you look at the numbers, it's $600 million that goes to our education budget from the grocery tax. And again, Alabama, we've seen the statistical data. Alabama has one of the lowest tax burden on her citizenry of any state in the nation. Now, other states don't tax groceries. Alabama chooses to do that. Is there a way that, even though we have the lowest tax burden already, are there ways that we can modify some of the taxes on food? And I just think that's an organic conversation. It impacts and affects everyone, every area of the state, whether it's rural, whether it's urban. So I think that's why you've begun to see this as a topic of discussion. And I have encouraged it within the Senate to continue to think about it, look at it, recognize we can't eliminate significant funding within our education budget, of course, long term. But if there are ways to use some of the funds that we currently have to be able to moderate some of those taxes over time, then it's smart for us to look at it, and it would be beneficial for the people of Alabama.
Criminal justice reform advocates from across Alabama descended on the State House this week, urging lawmakers to revive and pass legislation making changes at the Board of Pardons and Paroles. They are dissatisfied with the low percentage of paroles the board is granting. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott reports.
The House Judiciary Committee hears from Representative Chris England about his House Bill 16, a proposal to revamp the state's Board of Pardons and Paroles.
It creates an 8-member Criminal Justice Policy Development Council that will help create guidelines for the parole board. It will update the inmate classification system, adopt a validated risk and needs assessment for felony offenders, and provide quarterly reports to the legislature beginning in October of 2023.
Lawmakers, including Representative Jerry Starnes, expressed how they feel about this bill, which is placed in a subcommittee.
I just didn't think it was necessary to have another board look at the parole board. there's other forms of government that do oversee the parole board. You got the governor and the attorney general's office. I just didn't see another form board that needed to address that issue.
The next committee meeting day, the ACLU of Alabama came to the State House to talk to citizens about this issue.
We have a crisis right now. Since January 1st, the parole board has denied 97% of people who have gone up for parole, even though their own guidelines say that 80% of those people wouldn't be a threat to public safety and could go home. So we've got over 200 people who are at work release, who go to the community every day safely, who have been denied parole, and we're just urging the legislature to have some accountability there.
Alabama's system is not ensuring public safety by keeping people incarcerated much longer than they perhaps need to be, and much longer than perhaps they would be able to make a positive transition back into their communities. The way that the system is operating right now is not one that is a representation of justice and fairness like the people in this room are calling for today.
Joining the ACLU is the Alabama Justice Initiative, bringing citizens and students to get a first-hand look at legislation in motion.
Well, when you look at the statistical analysis, the county in which they come from, which is Jefferson County, has one of the largest incarceration rates in the state. So most of us are directly impacted in some type of way by the Alabama Department of Corrections as well as the Alabama Bureau of Pardon and Paroles. So it's important for, again, them to see the legislative process and how it works and what, if anything, them as well as their parents could do to make changes within this system.
For Capitol Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
Looking ahead to next week, House Speaker Nathaniel Ledbetter said he expects another 3-day legislative week, though that middle day might not have a lot of floor action. Leadership is trying to make up for time lost during the special session.
I think we'll see a 3-day week. We're going to come back. Of course, we're trying to make up some of the time we lost during the special. We'll do that. Plus, because we started later, it being an election year, it put us back and would be some people's vacation time. Mm-hmm. So we may try to end it a little quicker, but not. We want to get all the days in. We want to make sure that the 30 days that we're allowed, we get them in. And I think this has helped our process. Once we'll start on the special order calendar Tuesday, and we'll come in probably Wednesday, just open the journal to move some bills, have committee meetings, come back Thursday, and have another full day like we did today.
We'll be right back with this week's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
Joining me next is Carla Crowder, Executive Director of Alabama Appleseed. Carla, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I know it's an important week for your organization because you have come out with this new report, very lengthy report, and it's essentially chronicling, it's been 4 years since the Department of Justice had its report, really damning report about the state of Alabama's prisons. So here we are 4 years later, and y'all have gone and kind of done a state of play. I tried to print it out, actually. It's too long. It's very, very lengthy. But walk me through the basics of this report and your findings.
Sure. So a lot of us who've been working in criminal justice reform, representing incarcerated people, were relieved back in 2019 when we finally saw, in black and white, these findings by the Department of Justice. They had been investigating for 2.5 years. And what they found was shocking. It was embarrassing for the state. There were news reports across the country. Our legislative leaders used words like, "this is humiliating," and Governor Ivey promised accountability. I don't know how many times I heard somebody in state leadership say, "we are not kicking the can down the road anymore." So there was this palpable sense of, as horrific as these conditions were, all the lives who had been lost, all of the violence that was persisting, that we were at a moment where the state was going to stop, recognize the error of its ways, and begin to repair the harm. So I felt a sense of hopefulness, and a lot of advocates did. But what we've seen in 4 years is that nothing has improved. Everything, all of the indicators of issues raised by the Department of Justice overcrowding, understaffing, deaths, violence, suicide, contraband, mismanagement have gone in the opposite direction. So we knew it was going to take a while, but 4 years and no real improvement, I think is shocking. And the fact that now we're in a legislative session and the same people who said, we can't let this go on, we have to make some changes, are completely silent. So just in trying to figure out, okay, what really has happened in the last 4 years, I dug around on the DOC website, and we have seen almost 700 deaths of incarcerated people in these 4 years. That is unprecedented. One thing the DOJ said is that Alabama's prison homicide rate is about 8 times the national average in 2019. Well, that's only gone up. So we're looking at persistent conditions that have not been addressed that are resulting in massive loss of life in our prisons.
So, yeah, and look, I think everybody recognizes this. We've seen the headlines. We've almost maybe become too numb to it. But what do we do? What is your organization, maybe some others, what are some solutions? Because I think in this building, I think you do have some state leaders that want to see some progress. You know, it's hard to hire prison guards, things like that. So what are some of the solutions that y'all have put forward or others have to actually get at this problem and really make a difference?
Sure, and there's no way Alabama will solve this problem without recognizing that we incarcerate too many people. We cannot constitutionally keep in custody 20,000 people in Alabama. So what we've said is, until we begin investing more robustly in things like drug court, diversion, mental health court, mental health resources on the front end to provide those public safety and community safety services that keep people out of prison in the first place, we're going to continue to have these problems. And then what we've looked at on the back end is, because of draconian laws that passed in the 80s and 90s that have not kept us safer, we have thousands of older people in prison. So around 7,000 people over the age of 50, almost 3,000 over the age of 60. They've outgrown criminality. So we have put forward some proposals. Let's look at some of these cases. If you are serving a long sentence, life without parole, for a case where you never physically injured anybody and you're at least 50 years old, let's review and see if it makes sense to spend, $50,000, $60,000 a year to keep you locked up. And these are the kind of things that other southern conservative states have had to do. Texas was looking at building 3 new prisons a few years ago. Governor Rick Perry, definitely tough on crime, conservative credentials. He said, why are we going to waste all this money on something that doesn't work? They invested in reentry. They invested in drug treatment, in family services. Crime went down because out of control, chaotic prisons don't create public safety. They create people who get out and don't have good options.
So I hear what you're saying, and I would love to take a look at some of those proposals. And I've heard about some of them, especially at the Judiciary Committee. But when I hear from most Republicans, it's the opposite. A lot of their proposals only want to lengthen sentences and take away opportunities to get out and things like that. I'm reminded of the Shawshank Redemption, the warden's line in there one time when I guess Dufresne's trying to write the state legislature. He said, all the legislature cares about when it comes to prisons are more walls, more bars, and more guards. I mean, I'm not trying to be glib, but it is kind of a reality, a political reality, that it's just easier to run in this environment. It's tough on crime. You're rarely going to get penalized for that, whereas you don't see a whole lot of them, Republicans at least, coming forward with proposals like you're talking about. So how do you make that, start that conversation with the ones who were in control?
Right, and I think a lot of our Republican leadership understands that the problems have not been solved. What we're trying to help voters and help lawmakers and other people understand is this case is going to trial in a year and a half.
That's right. Yes, the DOJ, the lawsuit, actually.
Right. A trial is scheduled in federal court, and these bills that we're seeing now that are moving the state in the other direction, more overcrowding, longer sentences, are not going to turn the tide when the state is facing a federal judge And nobody seems to want to acknowledge that there's a really good chance that the state will not prevail. Nobody's talking about, well, what happens next? What happens if we lose? What happens to, the population of county jails if state prisons cannot accept people from county jails, which is what happened in California when the exact same situation, a case called Brown v. Plata, that was decided in 2011. What happens when the federal courts say, no, the state of Alabama, that $1 billion new prison, that wasn't enough. You're going to have to do X, Y, and Z that's going to cost hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Where's that money going to come from? And so I hope voters who want to say they support law and order and tough on crime realize that a lot of these decisions may be out of our hands unless we take control of the situation now. And we're not doing it by bills that lengthen sentences.
Well, I definitely think back in 2019, that was part of the motivation for a lot of that rhetoric was, oh man, are we going to get taken over? Is it going to be, because that was part of it. But that, like I said, it was 4 years ago. Let me move to the issue of contraband, because as I was reading the report, this really stuck out to me. In that, you kind of named it as really the top maybe issue, because it's drugs, it's weapons, things like this. But it's pretty obvious that this stuff is getting in through guards or staff at the prisons, especially throughout COVID when no visitors were allowed in and the stuff still got in. So it's an interesting problem to read about. It's fascinating. It's kind of terrifying. But my question is, what can be done about it? Because, have other states addressed this problem with contraband and found ways to actually combat it and successfully combat it?
Sure. Well, there's a prison right here in Alabama that's addressed it. So Tutwiler Prison for Women was under some federal oversight about a decade ago. There were a lot of problems there. And the state worked together with the Department of Justice to implement. They removed a lot of the problematic staff. They brought in better cameras. They did some facility improvement. They didn't build a new prison. And you never hear about overdoses or guards getting fired for corruption at Tutwiler. It can be done. What I see when I visit the prisons as a lawyer going to see clients, sometimes I walk through and there's no security whatsoever. I faced more security coming into the State House than I face walking into a maximum security prison 4 years after this DOJ report about contraband comes out. So the State Department of Corrections doesn't seem to be taking this seriously. And the repercussions of it are truly horrific. We've talked about the deaths, many homicides, many overdoses, but there are also young people who have been sent to prison for minor cases who are coming out in wheelchairs, who are coming out paralyzed from stabbings, from beatings. The just lifelong consequences to incarcerated people being around this corrupt, violent environment driven by the contraband is really shameful for this state. So I think other states have addressed it, and I think there has been a lack of serious investigation, because if you know it's driven by guards and you have about half of the guards that you need,
yeah, that's the whole thing, is they're trying to hire more.
It's sort of this sort of vicious cycle. So do you root out the corruption and lose 40 staff at Bibb Prison, or do you just kind of,
Yikes.
Yeah.
That's difficult. Well, you mentioned the new prisons a couple of times. And I'm curious about this because this thing's going up in Elmore County. I guess Escambia is kind of on hold. Costs have gone up and everything. You've kind of mentioned it. It seems like you're all kind of in opposition to this new prison being built. I'm curious about that because, we talk about dangerous prisons, dangerous facilities. The proponents of building new ones say, that's part of the issue is we've got these dilapidated facilities where it is, you can't just do some repairs and it's okay. We need a new modern facility where fewer guards are needed and stuff like that. So is that not part of a safer environment and everything, a modern facility?
New construction could be part of a safer environment, but it's not the exclusive solution. And right now that's been the state of Alabama's only solution. We're throwing $1 billion into the new prison on top of the DOC's $700 million annual budget, swallowing up about 25% of the general fund. So yes, if you want to build more housing space, more program space on a limited basis, and combined with addressing the issues around lack of services, lack of security, too much contraband, no investigation. It can be part of a solution, but it can't be the only solution. And right now, it's way too expensive for the state to spend money on other things. Right now, we're hoping to get about $500,000 to do some reentry housing, which is a tiny, tiny fraction of what the state is spending on prisons. And we're having trouble getting that money so people who are coming out of prison can have a solid start and a place to live. $500,000 the state doesn't want to spend. And so we have never said, we're against all new construction. We're against such an enormous amount of state funding to go toward buildings only, because buildings aren't killing people.
Well, we're out of time, so I have to leave it there, but I really appreciate you coming on, and I encourage it. We'll put a link to the report so everybody can go read it.
Thank you. Thank you for helping us tackle this tough topic.
Carla Crowder of Alabama Appleseed. We'll be right back.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Joining me next is Mark Dixon, president of the A+ Education Partnership. Mark, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's been a while since you've been on Capitol Journal, last year, I guess. So I was going to ask you to remind our viewers just about the A+ organization and your role in the education space in this state.
Sure. So A+ Education Partnership has been around for 30 years. We're a statewide advocate for creating great schools for every child regardless of circumstance. So our goal is to improve the public education system in Alabama and really be an advocate for students. So to be an advocate for an advisor to state leaders around evidence-based policies and investments that are going to move the needle for kids. That's our goal. But we also operate 2 programs directly in schools. So we have the Alabama Best Practices Center that provides professional development to teachers and school leaders. And then we have A+ College Ready, which is actually a partnership with the state to expand access to advanced placement courses around Alabama, as well as working with middle schools to raise that rigor so that more kids can have access to AP. So we kind of have 1 foot in the schoolhouse, 1 foot in the state house.
Yeah, I like that. And you've got this summit coming up. You're working with other education organizations about this summit. Tell me all about it.
That's right. So next week in Birmingham, next Friday and Saturday, April 14th and 15th, we're hosting the Alabama Opportunity Summit with Teach for America Alabama, who's a great partner of ours. Teach for America has actually hosted this summit for 7 years as a resource for educators to get training. There's a job fair and booths set up to really be a resource for educators. This year, they asked us to partner with them to really expand that focus more to statewide policy. So how do we bring parents, community leaders, teachers, business folks to get to the table to say, how do we bring greater focus on improving schools in our state so that we're building an Alabama where kids can lead, achieve, and really thrive? And so that's the goal of the summit, is to really broaden that. There's something for everybody.
So for those watching, who would be the type of person that would maybe be likely to attend? Who's your audience you're trying to attract?
Absolutely. So for kind of the full community at large, this is anybody sitting at home. We're going to have the governor there on Friday to bring welcome remarks at lunch and talk about her agenda for education in the state. We're also going to have Dr. Mackey in the afternoon, state superintendent, to provide an update and an introduction. We'll have the Secretary of Early Childhood, Barbara Cooper, to provide that information on our pre-K program and ways we can engage there. We'll also have a great panel the folks from Tennessee who actually recently passed a huge school funding reform in their state. So we'll actually have the education commissioner from Tennessee, Penny Schwinn, is going to be with us to talk about that change and what that means for Tennessee students and what could we potentially learn in Alabama to update our funding formula here. And then Trish Crane with the Alabama Ed Lab is going to be working and bringing a panel of her high flyer schools. These are schools that have outperformed their peers around the state, and how can families and teachers really learn from them and opportunities to take that home.
Well, that sounds like a really interesting summit, and so we'll share information on the screen of how to attend and everything, but thanks for highlighting that here. Well, we're here in the legislative session, lots of issues going around education. We'll get to some of those later, but I wanted to ask you about previous laws that y'all were involved in. Literacy Act, Numeracy Act, these are 2 laws that you had a very big role in crafting and in passing. but now they're being implemented. I'll start with literacy because that was back in 2019. How's it going? Are you pleased with the progress the state has made in implementing the Literacy Act, and are we seeing some results?
So with literacy, I think we've made a great start. You know, there are now significant funds available for training in the science of reading for teachers, as well as providing core reading programs, interventions, assessments, all the tools that teachers need to effectively provide that support to students, especially our struggling readers. There's going to be some growing pains with that. So I think, you know, it's up to state leaders now to stay the course, to make sure that we're maintaining that rigor, that we are focused on what's best for kids, and making sure that we're continuing to invest in providing those supports, because that's going to take time. But I will say we've already seen some progress. When the national data came down from the nation's report card in 2022, we were one of only 3 states to go up in reading scores, and that was over the course of the pandemic. So the policy supports and the supports directly for schools or for teachers in schools is really important and is working.
Now, will this be the first year of that accountability provision?
The accountability provisions would be next year.
Next year,
in schools, next school year.
That's where if you're not reading proficiently at the 3rd grade level, then you could get held back. But there are lots of supports for getting that student across the finish line over summer, right?
That's exactly right. And, you know, 3rd grade to 4th grade is that transition where we move from kids learning to read to reading to learn. And so without that foundational skill, they need that additional support before moving on, or we see in the data there's very little chance that they graduate.
Well, how about numeracy? Because that's the more recent law. That was 2021, I guess.
2022. So the Alabama Numeracy Act passed last year, and so it's very early in its work there. And I think we're still in the beginning stages. So we'll see some investment in coaches this year, I think. We also, though, there's an early math task force that's working really hard to make sure that the right programs are in schools, again, with the most effective kind of core math programs, the curricula in teachers' hands, those right assessments and materials as well. That's really important, and so we've got to do the hard work now so that can be implemented more quickly. And I think there's a lot we can learn from the Literacy Act to make that more successful, you know, just as we always do. We learn from experience.
So the governor came out with her budget in terms of, you know, education funding and everything. A lot of focus on literacy, a lot of focus on numeracy. Were you pleased to see that? And look, it's going to change. The budget's going to change. So I guess you're engaged in the process to see those investments remain or increase until get to the finish line.
I think there's a lot of good stuff in the budget. I think we see an increase in first-class pre-K, which is one of our top programs in the state and nationally recognized. There's also a significant investment in high-quality child care, which actually supports the high-quality pre-K program. So in making sure that we can add more sites, we have to increase the quality of child care, so that's really important. Increased funding for the Numeracy Act this year to focus on adding math coaches to schools. And so there's a lot going on budgetarily as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, going into the session, really from, you know, late last year into the inauguration, you know, preceding the session, school choice was the buzzword. Everybody was for it during the election season. Governor mentioned it in her inaugural address, the lieutenant governor, everybody was talking about school choice. But here, 4 weeks into session, we really haven't seen much move in that direction. What are you hearing from the education community, and what are we likely to see happen on the school choice front this session?
I expect we'll see something on education savings accounts, vouchers, that possibly. But I think we have a real opportunity to expand and improve the choice that we have. We have a strong charter law that was passed in 2015 to expand access to high-quality public charter schools across the state. We supported that law. We are for all public schools. We believe that public charters are one tool in the toolbox to make sure that the kids that need it most have choices and access to opportunities for them to go to a great school. But there are some updates that could be made, and so we expect to see a bill this session, as the governor has pointed out in her State of the State, that work to make sure that we're streamlining that process, that make sure that those schools are set up for success, that they have the funding that they need to do what they need to do. Mm-hmm. And you've also got scholarships for students that potentially that could serve from out of some of our failing schools. Right now, that's only about $30 million out of the budget. It's not very big, but it helps a small number of kids. And so there may be opportunities to expand access to that on a small level and to give that as another option too.
Mm-hmm. I keep hearing that because the talk had been around the big, go big on this voucher. Parents can keep their tax dollars and send kids to private school or whatever school. That seems to not have really taken off. because I keep hearing, well, we have choice options. We have the Accountability Act. We have the scholarship program and all this. And why don't we use existing laws, existing tools, and maybe make them better rather than go whole hog into the voucher business? So is that line up with what you're hearing?
I'd say so. And if we were going to go around an ESA, I would say start small. Test this idea with students that need it most, with special education students who may need additional resources. Try it out to see how that program works and maybe expand over time.
Well, I was thinking about this because I remember when you took over at A+, Caroline Novak, who had been there many years, retired. So you took over, and part of your job was to kind of reintroduce yourself to the legislature, to this sort of political space, having worked in the Riley administration a while back. Well, now we've got a bunch of new legislators. I think 37 new freshman legislators. Do you have to do that all over? Are you like reintroducing yourself and A+, the organization, to people that maybe aren't really aware of what you do?
Well, and I think that's part of certainly what we're doing is that reintroduction. I think it's also we want to be a trusted source for information. We're going to tell you what the data says and what we believe based on the evidence is the best policy for kids. We're going to tell you when we agree with you and we disagree with you, but really it's that phone call. I'm thinking through this. Let's be a thought partner. Help us, let us help you. We want to be a resource. So that's our goal. And we're seeing a lot of excitement in this new class about making a significant contribution. And there are a lot of legislators that have been here a long time that also want to continue to work on things. I think our goal is to say we have some really strong foundational pieces like the Literacy and Numeracy Acts that we need to really implement. And sometimes that's the hard thing is waiting a year or two and making sure that they have the funding and the resources they need before making wholesale changes before we've seen the actual results. So sometimes it's hard to press on the brake a little bit while we're trying to go really fast with implementation.
Last thing I'll ask you about is, we spend so much time talking about the legislature because ultimately they're in charge of the funding and of the policy. But we also have a school board, a state school board, who's tasked with policy on the education front. Maybe often overlooked. I know that recently they've tried to have better communication with the legislature and everything, but y'all are engaged in the school board level. Does that need to happen more? Do we need to focus more, or does the legislature and the school board need to communicate more on policy as it pertains to schools?
I think leadership at the state level is critical on any kind of significant change like the one we're trying to make in education over the long haul. And alignment of leaders is critical. Now, that doesn't mean they're always going to agree, but having those conversations back and forth, understanding how the pieces all fit together, that's critical. So we fully support those conversations. And I think going forward, is to open that up and make sure that we can bring new ideas into the space because we've got a lot of work to do.
That's an understatement. Well, we're out of time, but Mark Dixon, president of A+, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, and I hope everybody comes out to the Alabama Opportunity Summit next Friday and Saturday in Birmingham. Thank you.
We'll put it on the website.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
Joining me next is Abe Harper, president of Harper Technologies and a board member of Innovate Alabama. Abe, thanks for coming on the show.
Todd, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Innovate Alabama, the Alabama Innovation Corporation, this is why you're here and why I want to talk to you. Tell us more about that organization and its mission in the state.
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, thanks for this opportunity and for being here. It's a mission that we're very passionate about and spreading the word, getting people aware of it. The corporation, in order to understand where it came from, we have to step back to 2020. Governor Ivey appointed and commissioned several legislators and local private stakeholders to come together under the assumption of creating and understanding Alabama's ecosystem and economy better to create opportunities for innovative opportunities. What that looks like is you get the Hoover Institution with Dr. Condoleezza Rice and several other advisors partnered up that are looking at everything from policies to initiatives to what makes Alabama great, what makes it where someone wants to come here, run a business, stay here, sow their talent back into the community, and then really build on top of that, and how do we take that and accelerate it forward. All of these ideas come together in this nice report that was handed to the governor late 2020. But one of the things that came out of it was, I'm sorry, late 2021. One of the things that came out of it was a midterm recommendation that with all of these suggestions of how to improve the legislative process or improve policies that may impair businesses, who's going to be the oversight after the commission has done its work? So the corporation was birthed through a bill, I think HB 240 or 540 in 2020. I can't remember the exact bill number. But the corporation was built as a mechanism to continue that support. So
the recommendations don't just stop at recommendations. There's a body out there that actually can do it.
Exactly. There's accountability, there's transparency, and there's action. I'm privileged to be one of the members that was actually a part of the commission and now a member of the corporation. And to be able to see it go from an idea to an action is really cool. Currently, we have 11 members total, Governor Ivey, 5 ex officio legislators that serve, and then 5 private sector citizens that serve. And it's a focused effort to take those recommendations by the commission and put them in action, but also to find new ways to help innovators grow roots here within Alabama. Most recently, we've hired a CEO, Miss Cynthia Crutchfield.
Yeah, we met.
Have you met her?
Yeah, I was hoping to have her on the show at some point too.
She's amazing. She's drinking from the fire hydrant, as I like to say, but she's come and hit the ground running, and she's kind of taken the yoke. And last year, the board did much of the work in kind of structuring to keep the momentum going to get us to the point where we had someone that could be at the helm. And now that we've got her, the board gets to do a little more fun stuff like this, like share the mission and tell where we're headed.
Well, your company strikes me as like a poster child for innovation. You know, what we're trying to attract in Alabama or grow in Alabama. Tell us about Harper Technologies, and is that true? Would you say that's sort of a model for what you are seeking elsewhere?
I think so. You know, our company is a managed services IT company. It's about 20 years old this year, so it's near and dear to me to see an initiative like Innovate Alabama, and very much the reason I love to serve, because I know some of the struggles as a small business owner I went through to find good talent, to find access to capital, and to attract people to come to Alabama and want to stay here.
And you're based in Mobile, right? I
we
should
are.
have mentioned that.
That's correct. That's correct. So our company focuses on computer management for clients, infrastructure such as fiber, copper, and wireless, and then data services, offsite backup, expert witnessing, and cybersecurity. So, I tell people at the end of the day, we're nerds that speak both geek and English.
Well, so Innovate Alabama is really in the news right now because one of these game plan bills, the economic development, package from the governor and legislative leadership, has to do with the Innovation Corporation. Grants that I guess it's House Bill 247.
Correct.
Right?
That's right. That's right.
Innovation grants, but not through the Department of Commerce, but through the Innovation Corporation, which is a pretty big shift.
Right. So you've got two components of that bill that are coming out of Innovate Alabama. You've got the SBIRS-TTR, the SIBR-SITR, as we've affectionately come to know it, supplemental grant recommendation for residency, and I'll dig into that just a second here a little bit more. But then there's the Growing Alabama tax credit that currently resides under the Department of Commerce. You'll recall that's coming up for expiry, and the Department of Commerce is renewing it. And it currently encompasses 3 segments. That's site development, business or technology accelerators, innovation accelerators, and then underrepresented community businesses. Mm-hmm. Under the revision, as it's being written with Commerce, the understanding is that those latter 2 segments won't be included. It'll be site development exclusively. The recommendation in the legislation that Innovate Alabama has put forward is for us to take a segment of that tax credit from the Department of Commerce and then be able to use that to further the underrepresented business segment as well as the innovation accelerator space. And there's some nuance to how it's being rewritten, because currently the underrepresented business segment leaves a lot on the table for kind of an unfair advantage. It basically says female-owned businesses or minority-owned businesses that are more than 51%. we're focused more, because Alabama is a very small business driven state, we're focused more on making sure it's an equitable opportunity in the small business segment too. So there's some language in that legislation to more align it with the small business segment or business segment that the corporation focuses on.
Interesting. Well, we were talking at the press conference with Senator Singleton about that, because I guess he's sponsoring it in the Senate.
That's right.
And just about why that's so important. This is something Alabama hasn't historically been very good at in terms of assistance for those underrepresented. Talk about why that's important in the small business community, maybe in a way that we don't talk about a lot.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on. One of the narratives and one of the things that has been discussed over and over and over is, how do we tell our story as a state as a whole? And that means representing every business, every citizen, every paradigm that goes into creating the Alabama business ecosystem. Just transparently, as a state, I don't think that we've historically done a great job of bringing those margins together and finding a way to uniformly do it. So there's an emphasis at the corporation level to focus on things such as the HBCUs, which are a huge contributor to that underrepresented community in the business segment in state.
We have more than any other state.
14. And that's a testament to the diversity of our state, right? And I think that lends itself to a lot of credibility on why this is a huge component of where we're going and what we're doing. And some of it truly is just changing the narrative so that people can see, hey, all businesses that want to relocate to Alabama have a fair opportunity at doing so, and there's a measure that we can help you get into doing it.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking was, okay, if Mobile or Birmingham or Huntsville is out there attracting these companies that we want, startups, innovators, and everything.
Right.
You're gonna, those type of folks are gonna want to come to a place that has support for these exact kind of things, rather than the opposite. You got to overcome some historical narrative there.
And the truth of the matter, and all things, is diversity breeds a wonderful ground for when it's in a healthy context, civil discourse, which yields growth. Right? When you start talking about having different schools of thought, not just in gender and race, but age and socioeconomic status too, that brings on an ability for people and organizations to grow in a healthy context, because you have so much difference of thought coming to the table to focus on the same goal. I think that's the real win out of it. The segment that Innovate Alabama is able to help with are the underrepresented business segment, however, in that specific one.
Well, the last census, everybody was expecting Alabama to lose, maybe not lose population, but kind of be stagnant and maybe lose a congressional seat. We didn't.
Right.
We actually grew. There was some pretty good news. So I was going to ask you, do you see Alabama's, especially in the cities, the Mobiles, Birmingham, Huntsville, we all know Huntsville's blowing up.
Right.
Do you see those areas as attractive places for innovators and people like that to come here, or does more work need to be done to give those areas, and I don't want to leave out Montgomery too, more tools and resources to attract those people? I'm thinking of places like Nashville and Austin that people are just flocking to. What's the secret sauce to see that kind of growth?
So one of the initiatives of the commission that yielded a return in the report was to assess what it was that attracted and retained talent in Alabama. There's a very well-known innovator in Alabama. I won't name him here, but he's openly made the comment before, if I can just get someone to come here, they'll stay. There's a lot to be said about that. We were privileged to have under the commission's report an assessment that pointed out and said the outdoor resource and recreation lifestyle quality, the cost of living being, we don't want to diminish what the value of it is and call it low cost, but it's affordable.
Oh, it's a big difference. Having moved back from D.C. 5 years ago, it's a huge difference.
Right. So those are real environmental draws to get people to come to Alabama and stay. We're seeing it down on the coast. We love it down there. I'm a boomerang example. I moved away to Florida for a year, was landlocked in a city inland, did not like it at all, came right back to the Mobile area where I spent another year or two in school and started my business. But I love the cost of living. I love the ecosystem. I love to be able to, if I need a reset, I can go find a beach. If the same day I can hop in my car, drive north, and go find mountains. There's something. I don't want to over-romanticize it, but there's something beautiful about it inside of the state. That is what helps us to get talent to stay here, and the report showed us that a lot of the target audience for the talent that we're seeking, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for quality of lifestyle, outdoor recreation, and entertainment. So that plays a big part into, I think, all of the cities that are growing. You nailed it. Nashville has done such a great job of blending business and entertainment. And they've created commerce on both sides of it. And we're finding ways to do that in our own sense. We're, one of the things that we've talked about openly in the corporation is we're not trying to be another city or another state. We have our own identity.
Sure.
We just have to walk into it in a wholeness and a fullness that represents us accurately.
That's interesting. Well, we're out of time for this interview, but I want to have you back because I think this is something that's going to get legs. We're really going to be talking about this for many years, and so it's fun to kind of see it from the ground level as it gets started. So,
Yeah.
Abe Harper, thanks again for coming on Capital Journal.
Thank you. Pleasure.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back Monday night at 10:30 p.m. with more coverage of the Alabama Legislature right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capital Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.